Let's find out if you're ready for love. Here's your marvelous host, Nikki Lee.
Hello, and welcome to Ready for Love Radio. This is your host and love coach, Nikki Lee. Now, we all know that with the Internet, we have access to pretty much everything imaginable. Some is dependable, some is reliable, and some people have this feeling if it's on the Internet, obviously it's true. Now, I've been on the Internet pretty much since the beginning, and I could tell you a whole lot of things on the Internet are not true. A whole lot of things are just for entertainment, not for education. And it's really good to know what is true and what's not, especially when it comes to information that you really need for your well-being. So, and we know that too many, especially young people, are out there and they want truthful, honest information or any information about, I'm going to say it, sex. I've done a couple of informal surveys on my Facebook page just asking parents, have you had the talk? You know what I'm talking about, that talk. And a lot of parents don't want to have the talk with their kids, So kids are finding out about sex other places. Unfortunately, they usually are finding out by watching porn. And a lot of, quite a few adults, that's where they got their education. So, we all need to kind of learn the facts, somewhere dependable and somewhere reliable. But where can you get the real information? I personally think you should come to a love coach, or my radio show and get the real facts, because I work hard to get experts. But there are other places where you can get the real information, and I would highly, highly recommend that you meet my guest, because he's got a website called Sex Smart Films, and he's actually got over 650 films about that include sex education, research, and you wouldn't believe the collection he's got. So, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing well, Nikki. How are you?
I'm doing good. And I gotta say, I watched way too many Sex Smart films over the weekend.
You can't watch too many.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. And I saw interviews with people I had only heard about, over the last 10 or 12 years. Man, I had a good time watching stuff and learned some things. I did, and reinforced some things that I had already learned. And you have got an incredible collection on your website. Wow.
Well, thank you.
I had heard rumors about your website, but wow, it was amazing I looked at a lot of things and I made a wish list of ones I'm going to watch, because there's only so many hours in the day, But there were some that I really wanted to take a look at before we talked, and wow, what a collection you've got! So I am really looking forward to sharing this information with the listeners, and just telling them how in the world did you? Was this? Usually as kids, we know what we're going to do when we grow up. So was it your? Well, let me tell the listeners a little bit about you first. Yeah. Mark Schoen is an award-winning filmmaker and human sexuality expert. He's produced over 55 films of his own that he uses in colleges and universities throughout the U.S., and he's been doing this since 1975. And he's the author of an award-winning book and video, Belly Buttons or Navels. And I remember the day I discovered that book. I love that. And I've gotten to read it now. I have my own copy. And
it's still available on Amazon.
It is. I found that. And actually, the book I'm working on with Susan Kay, I included a notation in there before I met you, So yeah, we talk about it in there, and the need to use the right names for things and not all these crazy names that people make up for body parts. So see,
yeah.
I was talking about you before I even met you.
Well, an interesting thing happened. I was doing a talk in the last year with a university, virtually, with a university class,
right.
And we were talking about the names of body parts, the genitals.
Right.
And there were it was a lecture hall, and there were close to 100 undergraduate students in there, so probably 18, 19 years old. And I asked, would they write down the names they used for male and female genitals as a child?
I can imagine.
Out of the say, 100 students, 2 had both accurate names.
I can believe that.
And it just goes to show how we don't get sex education at home. We don't get sex education in school. So most kids get information from their peers and from the internet. And
well, we don't go around calling our foot some funky name or our arm some funky name.
Yes. Why? And my favorite name that I heard for the female genitals was the hoo-ha.
Yeah. Seriously? Well, that's like I have guests come on. I'm like, okay, we don't have to worry about the FCC. Use the real name for body parts. And if you don't, I'm going to edit it out. It is what it is, folks. Don't get crude about it. Just use the right names. So, yeah, I'm determined that my audience is going to know what things are really called. So, wow.
When I think about this, I think of a sex educator who passed away, who has a number of books out, Saul Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
And he always said, you have to be an askable parent.
Ooh, I like that.
And yes, and think about it. He said, you don't have to sit down and have the talk one day, but you do need to let your children know that sex is a topic that we can talk about.
Right.
So giving them accurate names for body parts. If you see something on the news, make a little comment. Let them know we can talk about sex.
Right.
So when they do have a question, they come to you. Now, there are some parents who say, I don't want them coming to me. So, but that, and I always remember he said, and if you don't know the answer, say I don't know, but let's find out together.
Exactly.
So, and if you think of any other subject, if your child came to you and asked about astronomy, you wouldn't be embarrassed that you didn't know where, a constellation was located, but you'd get a map and look and share it with your child.
Right.
But when it comes to sex, we're all, up in arms. We don't know what to do. And because this has been passed down through generations. This is not something we started. So,
yeah, it's crazy.
And I always think about spending time. I spent time when I was in graduate school in Sweden and look at the cultural differences. And I remember being with a Swedish family watching television, and their 5-year-old child was in the room, and there's lots of nudity on Swedish television. And the child was watching, and no one thought anything of it. And then an American show came on called McCloud, and there was a big fight. The mother grabbed the 5-year-old boy and covered his eyes. She didn't want him to see violence. And I thought, wow, what a cultural difference. And I remember going to class the next day and telling my friend what happened. and said in the United States a child can see someone's head get blown off as long as he's wearing clothing.
Yep. I years ago I used to manage a video store, and I had this woman that came in and she brought her like 5 or 6 year old, and for him she rented the most graphic, gory horror movies all the time. And I'm like, seriously? You know?
Yeah.
And oh yeah, they don't bother him at all. I'm like, that doesn't concern you? You know, wow. I very glad I don't still know them, because that was long enough ago. He's probably in his mid-20s now. But wow. But yeah, it's it has concerned me for years what parents let their kids watch as far as violence and that kind of thing. But yeah. So let's share. I've heard this story before because I listened to your interview with Susan. Helen, was it always your dream to get into making movies about sex?
If you would have said to me when I was in high school or undergraduate school and college that I would be making movies about sex, I would have said you're out of your mind.
That's what I say about having a radio show about sex.
Yeah. If you would have asked me when I was 17 what I was going to be when I grow up, I would have said a hockey player. That was my dream. But I became a health educator, and I was teaching health education in a New York junior high school. So I was teaching 7th grade, who were 12-year-olds. And New York State mandated that we teach about sexually transmitted diseases. And I remember, I didn't know much about that, and I studied up on it and went into class the first day, wrote the names of the diseases on the board, and I said, you get these diseases through sexual contact. All of a sudden, the hands go up. What does that mean? I said, it means either sexual intercourse or oral genital contact. What does that mean? I spent the whole first class explaining what I meant by sexual contact. The class ends, I step out into the hall, and lo and behold, the school principal is standing there waiting for me. He knew this was the first day of this class, and he said, how did it go? And I said, I'm not too happy. And he said, why? And I told him what happened, and I said, I'm teaching them about sexuality by way of disease. Can you think of a more negative approach? And he agreed and said, what do you think we should do? And I said, we should start a sex education program. And he thought a moment, and he said, let's go for it. And that began photography was a hobby of mine. And I started making little slide programs for my classes. That summer, I enrolled in a graduate human sexuality program at NYU and went to Sweden for 2 months. And let me tell you that it opened my eyes, and I was able to observe Swedish children in sex education classes in 1st grade and seeing how they have a national sex education curriculum. And it's just part of going to school, and no one thinks anything of it.
Wow, starting in 1st grade?
Yes, starting in 1st grade.
Wow.
And the kids are very matter of fact. I mean, they walk into that class like they're walking into a history class. It's no big deal. It's more of a big deal for parents, for older people. The children they haven't been, I don't know what the word is.
Well, they haven't been taught yet to have an issue with it.
Yes, yeah, they haven't been taught shame.
Once you teach people to be ashamed and to feel guilty about it, then you can control them easier.
Yeah,
well, you can try to control them.
But you also can take a look. In fact, the World Health Organization has statistics by country. And if you look at unwanted pregnancies and compare the United States to Sweden, in fact, all European countries,
right,
teenage unwanted pregnancy rate is much higher. If you do the same thing with teenage HIV, the same thing, we're much higher. To me, it shows education is helpful.
Right.
Helps people be responsible about their sexual behavior. I remember when I was in Sweden, I grew up in New York City, and I remember on the subways there were these vending machines where you could put a coin in and get a piece of gum. And I saw the same machine on the street in Sweden. And I said, oh, I'm going to get a piece of gum. Ran up to the machine, pulled out a coin. There was no gum in the machine. It was condoms in the middle of the street. And I said, oh, my, I had never, if you wanted a condom, you had to go into a drugstore, and they were behind the counter. It was a big deal. And here, anyone can walk up to the vending machine and buy a condom. So the cultural differences are amazing and beneficial to the countries that allow this.
Well, there's such a stigma put on sex and thoughts of sex and this sort of thing that you've got all the collateral damage of low self-esteem, you've got the guilt, and you've got this snowball effect.
Oh, yeah.
That causes so many problems with people, and of all age groups, and then people, well, that's a whole show all by itself. But yeah, it's and people, and this is something I included in the book when that Susan and I are working on too. That you've got so many people that are only taught abstinence. They're not given any sex education, really, and then when they get into a situation, they just they're completely unarmed for the situation. They don't know what to do, Well,
yeah, you're absolutely right. Most Americans get their sex education either if they think there's a problem pregnancy or a sexually transmitted infection there. That's when they start looking for more information. Instead of getting it at an early age so you can prevent these things from ever happening, we suffer the consequences of a lack of education.
Well, and if you have absolutely zero sex education, you can get into a situation and not even know what's happening to you. Which, most people are going to find that confusing and say, come on, that couldn't possibly happen. But if you know absolutely nothing about sex, yeah, it can. Because you honestly do not know what's happening to you.
Yeah. Oh, it's, I hear these kinds of stories all the time. I have people who use my website. So a therapist called me, and a therapist had one of her clients watch this, probably the most widely viewed film on the website. It's a 12-minute film called, it's a sensei focus exercise on sexual anatomy and physiology. And this woman who had never had an orgasm, and she was close to 60 years old. She had never had an orgasm, and she wanted to make sure that she knew about her sexual anatomy. After watching the film, she told the therapist she never heard the word clitoris. She did not know she had a clitoris.
Oh, wow. She's 60?
Yes.
Wow.
So, here's a bad example of what a lack of sex education can do.
Right. Wow. Okay,
So,
I get us sidetracked. Sorry about that. Okay. Good conversation, though, and people need to hear this stuff. All right. So you've made 55 films. Tell us about some of the early ones.
The early ones. Well, I was a graduate student at NYU, and a bunch of us went to a club, and there was an entertainer that lip-synced a song by Charles Aznavour, the French singer, called "What Makes a Man," and it's called "What Makes a Man," and basically it's a story about a man who goes into a nightclub every night, his job, and he changes his sex before the eyes of the audience, and comes in as a woman and goes out as a man. And he acted the whole thing out in, a 4-minute song, 5-minute song. And afterwards, we went up to him and said, "Could I film this?" And we arranged a time for him to come to NYU. And we made a short film called Gender. And it's still being used today. And it's a film I'm very proud of. And it gets people talking about gender identity.
Right.
So that was the first motion picture I made. And it was shot in 16 millimeter film. So
I get the impression that you like to do things that get people thinking deeper than some other people do. Yes.
If you look at a list of my films, I made the film Belly Buttons Are Navels, which I showed this grandmother reading this book to 2 young children that identifies all body parts from head to toe. The book was made as a prop for the film.
Right.
And when the film came out, people were saying, "Where do you get the book?" And there was no book. So Mary Calderon, Dr. Mary Calderon, who was then the director and founder of SIECUS, the Sex Information and Education Council of the United States, loved it and had her agent contact me. The agent brought the book to the publisher, I forget the name, that does the Dr. Seuss books. And they said, "Yes, we'll publish it, but you have to remove one word from the book." Clitoris. And I remember Mary Calderon saying to me, "Mark, if you remove that word, you're going to have to answer to me." So needless to say, we did not remove clitoris. We found a smaller publisher and got it published. And it's still being used today.
Awesome.
And that came out, I think, in 1990.
Awesome.
The film was made in 1984. The book came out in, I think, around 1990.
Awesome. So, of all of your films, which one are you the most proud of? And I'm betting one of the top 10 is your movie Trans.
Yes, Trans. Trans is a film about the transgender community that came out in 2012. And when it came out, it was a different world back then.
Oh, yeah.
And the movie has saved lives. And if you go to it's on Amazon Prime, as well as Sex Smart Films. But if you go to Amazon Prime and just read the reviews, some of them bring tears to your eyes. It brought tears to my eyes. The film has literally saved lives. And I remember one experience. The surgeon in the film, who's transgender and does gender confirmation surgery, invited me to come to New Hope, Pennsylvania, where she works. And she has a bed and breakfast there for her patients and their families. And she gave me a room in the bed and breakfast, and I came down for breakfast that morning, and a woman came up to me and said, "Mark." And I looked at her, and I didn't know her. And she said, "You are Mark?" And I said, "Yes." And she came up to me, and she gave me a big hug. And I looked at her like, what is this all about? She said, "My daughter had surgery yesterday. When she first told me she was transgender, I was not at all supportive. I did not treat her nicely. And I was telling this to one, she was talking to one of her friends, and her friends had her watch my film, Trans. And she said, and now I'm here supportive and helping her after her surgery." So she said, "Thank you." So that kind of story I've heard a lot. And it's a lack of education, that people don't choose their gender identity. It's like you don't choose your skin color or your hair color. You're born this way. And, I think we have to learn to accept people for who they are and not who we want them to be.
I'm a firm believer in live and let live, and it amazes me how many people don't have that philosophy. I'm like, I don't force what I feel on other people, but I don't want them to do it to me either. I'm like, okay, live your life the way you want to, and I'm going to live mine the way I want to. Now, I'm going to share my opinions on my show, but you have the option to turn it off if you don't agree.
Right. And we quote Oscar Wilde, who said, "You got to be yourself because everyone else is taken."
Exactly. I don't want to be anybody else anyway. I want to be me. And it's a very strong moment when you get to the point where you realize that you are the person. So that's a big part of the reason behind Susan and my project. So who watches the films on your site? Who are they right for?
It's a wide range. I mean,
I'm getting that the more I dig into the site.
I mean, at the low end in age, parents will show a film to a child. Okay. And so we have, the true story of how babies are made, belly buttons or navels. And we have a slew of films for children and teens that are very popular. Then we have universities that show films in their classrooms. We have therapists who either show the film in a session or write a prescription and say, watch this film before our next session next week. And they give them a rationale why they want them to see the film, what they want them to get out of it, and then in their next session they discuss the film. There are couples who will watch a film together. Sit down, they have an issue they're dealing with, and we have a lot of sex therapy films, and they use them as self-help. And one of the things I tell couples is when you're watching the film together, feel free to press the pause button and talk. It's a lot easier to talk about that couple you see on the screen than to talk about yourself.
Yes.
And the films are sexually explicit. Not all of them, but many of the sex therapy films are sexually explicit. So, they're not made to titillate, they're made to educate. And
right.
So they've been very useful, and they're widely seen. We also have some films about sex researchers that a lot of the academics use. But there are some people in the general public who are curious and want to see some of them.
Well, I'm coming at it from a coaching perspective. And like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed being able to see some of the people that I've heard so much about through various clients and through my work with Dr. Ava and with Tova Fader and with Susan Kay, because I mean they toss out all these names of all these people they've worked with, and I'm like, oh, that's her, that's him, kind of thing. And then of course all the work with Masters and Johnson that I'm familiar with and all this sort of thing. But you've got three main. Oh, and I'm loving the commercials. Oh wow, and I love the umbrella commercial. That guy was point on. Oh, that was fantastic.
Well, the commercials come from 52 different countries, and if you watch, say, a condom commercial and compare the countries, did you see the one from Australia called Get Naked?
Yes. Oh, I showed that to a couple of friends last night, and I mean, we were just rolling. That was, oh, wow. You're not going to see that in the U.S., that's for sure.
No, you're not going to see that in the United States. In fact, I remember being at a conference and having an exhibit table for my company, and the exhibit table next to me was for Trojan, the condom company. And I remember I was talking to the gentleman, and I said, I've seen some of your commercials, and they're condom commercials, and you never see a condom. And he said to me, with good reason. And I said, what's the good reason? He said, if we showed a condom, it would never get on the air in the United States.
Right. It wouldn't.
No.
Wow.
So,
unreal.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's three main sections to the site. You've got education, research, and therapy. And you kind of hit on this, but just to elaborate a little bit, do you want to give a little bit more detail on what each of those sections contains? Because I mean, they're big sections and they're very diverse.
Okay, the therapy section is divided heterosexual, gay, lesbian. Then it has a thing on gender identity and disability. So, for example, the Sensate focus exercises, which were developed by Masters and Johnson,
right?
I made it the same film 3 times. Once with 2 gay couples, once with 2 lesbian couples, and once with 2 heterosexual couples.
I noticed that because I bookmarked all the Sensate Focus because I want to watch those, and I saw how you did that. That's very cool. Yeah,
so this way, no matter who you are, you can find, it's the same exercises, just the gender of the people in it are different. So, anyway, so that's the therapy. Education is divided. We have for children, for teens, then we have it divided by subject, puberty, masturbation, things related to gender identity, things related to sexual orientation. We have a section called Advertising and Sexuality, which shows the commercials and public service announcements from all over the world.
That's where the commercials are. Okay, I've been looking for them. I haven't done them yet.
Yes, in Advertising and Sexuality under the Education heading.
Okay.
And they're alphabetized by country of origin.
Okay.
So you can look, if you're interested in a particular country, you can look it up alphabetically.
Okay.
And then the research section has, you can look up researchers by name, you can look up research by subject, and that's basically how you get to those films. And we have films that are very old and very new. And I think it's important to have the older films. In fact, there's one film that was made, I think, in 1959 or 60. And I remember a therapist who I know told me he saw the film in high school, and it's called Boys Beware. And it's about hitchhiking in California. Young kids used to hitchhike. And it said, boys beware. They should beware they not get picked up by a homosexual. And this therapist I know said when he was in high school, this was shown in his class. And so I have it on the site, just so you can see how sex education has evolved, and some for good and some for not so good.
Right. That was one thing, too. I read several interviews that you had done, and like I said, I've watched a couple. And one of the things you were saying, too, is with the scope and depth of the things that you have, you can notice the evolution of how sex education has changed. And even with the teaching that you personally have done, it started out with scare tactics. We're going to teach them based on diseases they can get, and how it's evolved over the years, even just in the last 40 years or so. Is there something you'd like to share along those lines?
Well, I think we have some good, when I started my sex education program, I was teaching 7th grade, and I used a book called Love and Sex in Plain Language by Eric W. Johnson. And it was written on a 5th grade reading level, and it covered sexual orientation, it covered sexual anatomy, puberty, not the whole gamut. There was not much on gender identity. But
right.
I started teaching this in 1972. So for the time, it was pretty adventuresome, if you know what I mean.
Right.
We went to places that people in public schools in New York didn't do at the time. So
I'm trying to remember, because I'm thinking here I was in a county school in Virginia, and I'm thinking it was 5th or 6th grade we had sex ed here, what little we had, little film strip kind of thing. So I think it was like 78, 79, somewhere around there is when we had it here. So it wasn't that removed. There was no sexual identity, no gender information at all. Definitely no masturbation information. Just basically the very, very, very basic anatomy info. Yeah, it was sketchy. There wasn't much. It was bare bones, to say the least.
Yeah, and
I remember one of the girls wanting to know if she could carry a tampon in her back pocket, but it was. I don't know why that stands out all these years later, but it does. But yeah, very very little information, and of course all the sexually transmitted diseases, but. Yeah, there wasn't much else. That was for sure. No, and when most schools had a one night for boys and one night for girls, or days, and the girls learned mostly about menstruation. Of course.
And the boys learned about their genitals and about wet dreams and but not much else.
Right.
And even the female anatomy, they didn't mention the clitoris.
No, like I said, no real details, just the bare bones.
Yeah, and nothing about pleasure.
No, oh come on, especially not with the girls. They weren't supposed to have any pleasure. That might indicate that they were going to enjoy it. No.
Yeah.
and nothing about all the sensations in the clitoris. No, can't talk about that. So they might want to find out for themselves.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Unfortunately, I did a documentary about Betty Dodson. And if she had been there, she would have taught these young ladies a thing or two.
Oh my goodness, she would have brought her oysters with her too.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a documentary I'm very proud of.
Oh yeah, that was great. I watched that every weekend.
Yeah, it's called Betty Dodson, Her Life of Sex and Art. And she's something. She came to New York from Wichita, Kansas as a young woman, and she was an artist, and one of her early jobs was doing those like pen and ink drawings of underwear for newspaper advertising. And she said, I drew all this underwear, and she said, now I don't even wear any.
I know. She said, then I'm like, what'd she say? Oh, gracious. And the women ended up in a room by themselves at the sex parties, was cracking me up. But yeah, she's something. Yeah. Oh, wow. Let me see. So you've got films from so many different countries, and we sort of touched on this. But what's the value of looking at sexuality in all these different cultures?
Well, I think the value is you can compare the cultures in terms of how they present on sexual issues. So if you look at the United States, there's a commercial that was produced for the 2010 Super Bowl called Clothing Drive. And it was done by Anheuser. It was done by Anheuser-Busch, and it was about an office where they were having you donate a piece of clothing and you get a free Bud Light. Make a long story short, people are taking off their clothes so they could get a free Bud Light, and wherever you saw there was genitals or a bare butt or breasts, a black bar was over it, so you never saw any nudity. Anyway, this was made for the 2010 Super Bowl. The network rejected it. It was never on the air. So the mere suggestion of nudity was unacceptable. And then you have a commercial from Norway that's like our equivalent to AAA. It's if you get stuck in the mud in your car and you need to get towed, they come and get you. So this Norwegian couple were in their car, they get stuck in the mud, and they're trying to get some help, and there are some guys walking around, and they yell, "You need some help?" And they said, "Yes." Needless to say, they were in the middle of a nudist colony, and the next image you see are 5 men behind their car, stark naked, pushing the vehicle from behind, and you see 5 bare butts. And then the image you see over that was they should have been a member, meaning they should have been able to call for a tow truck. So, but that was shown on national television in Norway, and it shows the differences, and it shows, that they have sex education in Norway. They're more comfortable with sexual issues, and if you look at their problems with sexuality in terms of disease and pregnancy, they're much lower than the United States.
Right.
So,
and they're likely not ashamed of their bodies and having sexual thoughts because it's not something they're made to be ashamed of.
No,
just saying.
I mean, in the Scandinavian countries, children don't wear bathing suits when they're at the beach till they're probably about 7, and no one thinks anything of it.
Can't imagine. So where can our listeners see all of these fascinating things? How does your website work?
Well, you just go to sexsmartfilms.com. And if you want to see, say, one Sensei Focus film, which are about 12 minutes, you can pay 99 cents and watch a film. if you want to watch 650 films, you can pay $9.99 for a month, 31 days. You could pay $29.99 for 3 months and $59.99 for a year. And you have access, 24 hours a day access to 650 films. And then we have subscriptions for universities where they need to let all their students watch. But for the average viewer, that's the way to do it. You just go to sexsmartfilms.com and subscribe. And
yeah, that's not bad for a year at all. Now,
no.
somebody like me who's studied and continuing to study sexuality and this sort of thing with my coaching certification and that has clients and for therapists who use it for their clients. How does that work for a therapist who wants their clients to watch it? How does that?
The therapist, if the therapist wants, the therapist can show them the film in the office, or
right.
They could say, when you go home, go to sexsmartfilms.com and watch such and such a film, and you can do a pay-per-view. So
okay.
The client can just watch one film and pay, if it's one of the shorter film, 99 cents, and watch it. And then, but what I've seen is sometimes a client will go to the site, watch one film, and then end up subscribing for a month for another $9.99.
Right. Yeah, I realized I was logged out the other day because I'm like, 99 cents. Oh, hold on. I'm logged out. Okay, that's what's happening. But that was cool. So what about just average people? How many average people that aren't, say, therapists or students or that kind of thing, or coaches or whatever? How many just regular folks? I don't know what to call them. You have that subscribe?
A lot, because a lot of them will go on the internet and search for educational films about sex, and they'll land up on my site and do a little exploring and then sign up or watch an individual film. So not all the people who are watching are either therapists, academicians, or clients of therapists. Some people who just want to do some self-education. I
would think if you're curious at all, it would be a no-brainer. Because, like I said, I just started looking around, and, the time started flying because there's just so much, So.
Well, I remember when Betty Dotson passed away, I put one free film on the homepage, and I change it every 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And I put the documentary of Betty Dotson on the homepage.
Okay.
And I left it there for about 2 weeks. And I can't tell you how many people contacted me and thanked me, and people who knew Betty,
right,
and had never seen, but they knew her and had never seen the documentary.
Okay.
So, and she was one of a kind.
Oh yeah.
She was entertaining. She was knowledgeable, and she was so artistic.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the film is her art, which is pretty amazing.
Well, and listening to her describe it is fascinating. So, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Well, and your site has been called, I love this, the Netflix of Sex Education.
Yes. Yes, one of the reviewers who reviewed the site, that's a quote from the review. He called it the Netflix of sex education.
So is an app for streaming in your future?
There are some people who watch the films on iPads and iPhones, and
right.
So it depends on the technology.
Right.
But you mean make a specific app of just all the films?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got a Fire Stick from Amazon, and there's all kinds of different apps that I can add to the Fire Stick. So I was just wondering if there's an app for Sex Smart Films in the future.
Oh. I will have to investigate that. Thank you.
See, there's a reason that we were introduced, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, because then people could easily watch it on their TV. Imagine Sex Smart Films on your TV, Mark.
Yes. I like it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, going, I could just kind of put that on my TV. That would be cool. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that out there for you. All right. And if one of my listeners does that, they're probably going to send me a message. I just noticed there's actually there's a new feature video on the homepage too called "Bad One" from Germany. Interesting. Yes. And it's from the Education Collection. Interesting. Yes. Interesting. But I highly recommend that my listeners take a look. I've heard rumors and heard stories from lots of people I know about your site, and I'm thoroughly enjoying taking a look around. So you should definitely take a look. It's fascinating.
I get a lot of positive feedback. I'm trying to make some new films. I made one new film about 2 months ago. The gay activist Brian McNaught wrote a children's book called "What's Gay? Ask May."
Right.
And it's a 3-minute film, and I'm getting some good feedback on that one. So, but that's the newest film on the site.
Awesome. Well, like I said, there is literally something on here for everybody who is curious to learn more. So if you're like me and you want to learn more, you should at least take a look. So awesome. But yeah, it's well, and if they I'm logged out right now. So if you and even if you're logged out, you can see the most viewed videos, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, listeners, here you go. Even if you don't have an account, you can see the most viewed videos. Oh, no,
you can't watch them.
Okay.
You can't watch. You can see which they are. But
okay.
Yeah, because I the one film on the homepage.
Okay, I see the umbrella video that is just so cute. Oh,
yes.
Okay. But you should still take a look around. You can see some information, and you can see testimonials and all kinds of fun stuff. But yeah, like I said, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. All right. Well, I highly recommend taking a look around, and there will be a replay of today's show at www.lovecoachjourney.com/sexsmartfilms. So, Mark, thank you very much for being with me. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you, Nikki. I really appreciate your support.
Awesome. And listeners, I will be with you next time on Ready for Love Radio.